Okay, so today we're going to cover JavaScript and how it interacts with HTML and CSS. So yeah, we'll jump straight in. Here are some announcements for this week. Homework due Thursday, lab is due Monday, and the final project will be released soon. We're finalizing the grade reports for midterm, and you'll get an email for that soon-ish. And then if you want to look at some of the past projects, we have our website that may or may not work. So yeah, we'll go over a little bit of review from the previous weeks, and then we'll look at some new concepts. So first, we'll look at variables and functions. So yeah, just to cover this again, variables are like what we expect them are. They can, in JavaScript, you can assign it to different types of a variable, like an integer or a string. So in this case, name is a string. And then if you want to store a string like text, we have to use quotes. And then if we want to store integer or number, something like that, we store just like as the number form. And then that means like we're defining this variable. The name we can give it any name except for some like reserved words. And then we can use this name to access this value over and over again. So yeah, we can like manipulate these variables too. For age, we can set it to like something plus something. This will like allow the computer to do like the calculations for us. The second line, we did age minus 2.5. And this will pass, like this won't give us an error or anything, but it just won't give us the result we want because like it just subtracts 2.5 from the value, but it doesn't reassign it to anything. So like this 22.5 number just gets like lost. So if we want to keep track of this number, we have to reassign it to either a different variable or back to the same variable. And then the third line is one way where you can update a variable. You assign it equal to another expression. In this case, it's itself times 2. So yeah, that's like one way to reassign variables and how you can manipulate them. And then using functions, another review. A function is like what you write if you want to do multiple operations at once, and then it's like pretty self-contained and you can call it over and over again instead of having to rewrite all of these lines every time you want to use this function. So for show greeting, we give it a name and we initialize it by using the function keyword. The name within the parentheses is like what we pass in as a variable, and this variable we can use throughout the function. And this show greeting function does like creates a string called howdy name, and then like displays it as an alert. And then to call it, we just call the name of the function. You'll need parentheses, and in this case, this function needs us to pass in the variable name, in this case a string. So then we have to like pass in a value over here, or else we'll get an error. This is an example of another function. This function just kind of like takes a number and squares it. Again, we pass in the value x, and then what return does, it like gives us back a value. So the previous one, it just doesn't alert, it doesn't action, but doesn't like give us back a value. In square, we get a value back, and then we can use this new value to do other operations. So yeah, we have an example of how to use this function. Let y equal square 5. In this case, like 5 gets squared and we reassign it to y, and then we can use this value of y and call a square on that, and then it gives back the value 625. Yeah, do you guys have questions on this section? This should be review. Okay, in that case, we can move on to new concepts for today. So in this case, it's JavaScript objects. If you've taken like honestly 61A and 61B, you probably have had some exposure to like object-oriented programming and creating objects. So this is like a similar concept just in JavaScript. Some of the syntax is different, but a lot of the concepts will be the same. So like for those who haven't had any exposure to this though, an object is one way we can describe like a thing or like something that has features and that can have actions. So like you can have a person object, it could have like color, hair, or like height, or like weight, or something like that, things that describe it, and also has functions that it can do, like it can walk, it can talk, something like that. So like object is just a way to boil this down into like a standalone concept. So yeah, one like kind of simple example of an object is like a car. You want to represent a car with a lot of complex attributes like color, speed, something like that. Also be able to like drive. You want to kind of distill that into some form of code where you can use it over and over again and run it multiple times. So yeah, so car, you have properties of a car like color, model, current speed. These are something that define the current state of the car. And then functions are what this car can do. So drive straight, brake, change color. And these functions can also modify like these attributes of the car. Like if you brake, the speed of the car might change. So how we kind of might want to frame this in terms of code, in terms of JavaScript, we'll have these properties that we define. So, and this is how we kind of define it. We have names for them, but we don't really have to give it like the string value. And then functions will have like drive straight as like a function. If you remember, like the parentheses after something represents like a function call, brake, change color. So yeah, this is like how we want to define this car object. We give it the 3 attributes that we talked about: red, model, miles per hour. And then we can define the 3 functions: drive straight, brake, and change color. And the way we kind of like package this all together is it's stored into a variable again. So like we do let car. Again, let is like the keyword we use to define a new variable. And then we use these curly braces to surround this object, and that's how we know it's an object. And then within these curly braces, we can do the properties with the name of the property, colon, the value. And then for functions, we have the name of the function, colon, like the function declaration. And then inside the function declaration is how you would write a normal function that we've seen in the past. And then to separate all these properties and functions, we just use commas. Yeah, this kind of just shows how the color, model, mouse power are defined. And then this kind of shows like where the functions you can find within this car object. So yeah, this is a lot of new syntax. Some of you might not be super familiar with this. It might be your first time. So we won't really have to define objects in this class. I don't know if we'll ever need to for this class, but you'll see it out in the real world. If you code like more complex designs, you might have to write some functions or might have to write some objects because it might help you containerize things easier and like make it easier to like use it in different components of your website. But yeah, in our case, like it's good to know, and it's like a good JavaScript feature that you should hopefully understand. Yeah, do you have questions on like defining functions? If not, we can move on to like calling these object properties and calling some of the functions of an object. So to call either a property or a function, we use the dot notation. So we do like the name of the object car dot color to get the color. We do car dot drive straight to use the drive straight function of this car, and then like car dot change color blue to call the change color function for this car. And then this will do stuff. It will manipulate some of the properties, or you can read some of the properties and then use the functions, and you can like do what you want. So yeah, now that we kind of learned how a little bit more about JavaScript and how objects work, we kind of want to tie it back to HTML and CSS, and so we can like update our website or make our websites more complex. So yeah, we'll introduce something known as the DOM, and this is kind of how HTML and JavaScript will interact with each other. So yeah, this is like a diagram of how like HTML is on the left and JavaScript is on the right. We have these HTML like tags that represent different parts of it nested, and then JavaScript, this is how it will kind of go down the tree to access it. So we have the document at the top, that's like the overarching container for our website, and then underneath we'll have like the body. The bodies where all like your components are stored, and then you have like headers and then list items and stuff like that where it kind of goes down the tree. So yeah, this is a kind of a complex slide, and it kind of tells you some information about how JavaScript can manipulate each of these parts of the HTML and the DOM. What we will probably use a lot is the document selectors. So which this is like the overarching container for the HTML. So for JavaScript, some functions that manipulate the document, you can get element by ID or get element by class name. So this will go through each of your elements. You might give it like an ID tag or a class tag, and then you can select by these tags and be able to manipulate only those specific elements of the HTML. You can also look for titles and stuff like that. And then once you select these elements themselves, you can manipulate some of their properties, like which classes that they have or own. You can manipulate like the text of them or the styling of them, and then their children. And then for the other like H1 unsorted list items, you can also manipulate some of those attributes. And we'll use JavaScript to do some of these manipulations. So yeah. So one function we'll take a look at, which is really helpful for us to kind of use JavaScript to make edits on our HTML, is document.getElement by ID. So let's kind of see how that works. Basically, you pass in an ID that you want to, which element you want to find, and then this will go through the DOM and look for that specific element. And since IDs are unique across elements, there will only be one such element or zero. So if it exists, if the element exists, then we'll return. Yeah, so this is an example of how this works. We set this list element object variable to be like this section of code here called food list. Under this food list element, we have like 3 different list items, Mezzo, Pho, and Taco Bell. And then we can kind of manipulate some of the properties of this whole section by using this selector and then writing some additional JavaScript code. Maybe we can change the color or some of the text, stuff like that. So yeah, once we like get this portion, we can look up properties. We can look up the class list. So one class that it has is blue box. We can look at what's the HTML that's nested within it. And in this case, it's like we have the 3 list items, which are Mezzo, Pho, K&K, and Taco Bell. And if we want to just have the children, it'll give us the names of the tags for each of the children. So like 3 different list items. So yeah, the point of this is kind of to be able to manipulate these elements. So like if we want to change the state at a specific time or at a specific occasion, JavaScript will be what helps us select the items which we want to change and kind of perform some functions or calculations to determine what we want to change it to or when we should change it. So like, yeah, like if we click on a button, it could change the size of a component, or it could change it to like light mode and dark mode. And the way we do this is using JavaScript again. So we have a button here. If we call it with the ID called dark mode button, we select it by using document.getElement.id or by ID, and then we will change the CSS of that entire component that we want, and then we can see how this will affect our end product. So we'll look at the changing of CSS later, but wanted to cover like another possible way you could select elements. Query selector is one way you can look at, instead of by ID or by class, you can look at by the CSS selector of an element. So basically, yeah, we return the first element that matches that selector name. And in many cases, it might be the exact same as using ID. So in this case, you can select by like hashtag food list or like dot something, which would be the class dot blue box. That is like the CSS selector for it. And then in this case, it will give us the same as if we used the ID, because like it's the same name. But in other cases, we might want to select multiple elements or select multiple things, and this might give us another chance to do it. So it's honestly personal preference in a lot of cases, but sometimes it's more rigid. And another way you can select it is by like the UL, like the unsorted list. In this case, if we only have one unsorted list, it would just give us this food list ID section. But if we have multiple, it might give us all of them. And then, yeah, so for this as an example, like if we have two children or two child classes, it will give us the first child class. So now we want to be able to edit the CSS of these elements now that we've selected them. And we first find the food list element using the selector get element by ID, and then we can edit this class list property within it. And the reason why we talked about objects earlier is because like when we get the element by ID, it's returned to us as an object. So we'll have these properties, we'll have functions that we can call using that dot notation. So class list, if we call it dot class list, it'll give us all the classes that this element has. And upon that, we can perform functions like add, remove, toggle, or just simply view it. So yeah, finally moving on to changing the CSS itself. We're able to print out the class list by like logging it. And then if we add a new class to it called dark mode, and then write some CSS that relates to elements that have the class dark mode, this will like change the features of this element that we have had. So like if we add this class and print out the class list again, we'll see that this dark mode class gets added to the list, and we'll write CSS on top of this to do for classes that are dark mode. And yeah. And then removing a class is like the same. In this case, we added the class dark mode. If we use the remove function, it kind of just gets rid of it. And then if we print it again, we'll just have our original blue box. So adding and removing classes is one way we can edit the CSS of a code, because edit the CSS of elements without manually doing it, because if we write CSS for this dark mode class, like we do like background color equals black or something like that, it will apply when this element contains that class name, and then it'll like get removed when the class name gets like removed using some of these like dot add and dot remove functions. So how this kind of helps us, like we'll have different elements that we have, like a button or a link or an image, and then when you interact with it or click on it, we can either like change some of the properties within this element or add or remove classes, and this will like therefore like affect the CSS and HTML of these elements themselves. So yeah, this is kind of like the end of this class on objects and how they kind of interact with HTML and CSS. Do you guys have questions? If not, I think I'll pass it to Evan.
Okay. All right, cool. So today we'll be talking about dark design patterns, and this isn't like dark mode or anything like that. This is, yeah, not that. So let's get into it. Basically, so we've kind of like discussed design in the context of like improving user interfaces, improving like user experience overall, making pretty websites. But today we'll kind of be looking at design from another perspective, kind of involving like, I guess, intentions behind design, like ethical concerns, also kind of just overall responsibilities of designers. So, I guess this first slide, this should link you to a Vox, not an article, but a video. What's the title? Why cities are full of uncomfortable benches. So I'm sure you guys have like been at a bus stop or like seen these benches that just like don't make sense. Like they have weirdly spaced handrails, or like just not fun to sit on. Like you can't like rest your head. So the idea, or at least what the video touches on, is we won't watch it now, but basically they kind of talk about a sort of defensive design, which I'll kind of go in more detail later. That has to do with the intention behind these uncomfortable benches. TLDR is to prevent people from getting like too comfortable, which kind of seems obvious, but the reason behind that is to keep these like spaces like public, and also on like a darker note, I guess city planners kind of want to discourage homeless people from like sleeping, and so hence these designs. And you've probably like seen this around the city. You've probably also seen like other things that share these characteristics. So that's like one example to get us started. Yes, and so okay, yeah. So while like the reasons behind the way things are like designed in certain ways, they might not be like super clear immediately. While they might not be clear, they are very revealing about like a designer's intentions. Yeah, so just to get technical, I guess the next few slides will kind of be like flashcard style, like term definition, but we'll kind of go through some examples to like humanize them a little. So the first thing we'll talk about is defensive design, which pretty much relates to the first thing we looked at. And the definition that we'll use in this class is the practice of I won't read it. You guys can read it on your own, but basically it's the idea that you want to consider all like possible use cases of whatever like product or, you know, feature, platform, consider all the use cases, and anything that seems like, ooh, this has potential to be like misused, you want to like account for that and implement things to protect users almost like from themselves. So I guess one example that's not like digital is if you guys have seen like, let me think, like all like firearms have like a safety on them, because even though we expect people to use them in like an intentional manner, like if you drop it or if it like catches on something, you don't want it to go off, right? So that's kind of getting us into this mode of thinking like we want to consider all possible use cases. I guess like another one could be, oh, like some paper cutting machines have like you have to like press 2 buttons, because like if you're only pressing 1, there's a chance like you have your hand on the machine. So it's like this kind of idea of designing our things in a way that really like consider like all users, all like circumstances. Yeah, that's basically defensive design. Another thing we're going to look at is dark or like unpleasant design. This one is something you guys can probably relate to or like have seen a lot in your daily lives. But it's the idea that like interfaces are like created to make or like to not persuade in an explicit or obvious way, but very subtly alter a user's behavior to make certain decisions or make choices that they might not be aware of, but ultimately kind of benefit your own bottom line. So I guess like one example I can think of is if you guys have ever been to like restaurants, or actually here's like a good one. If you have been to like yeah, like any place where you pay on like that little digital screen, and then the like cashier's like right there, right? And you're about to tip, right? You're about to finish paying, but then there are all these tip options, right? And they're like right there, right? Like how do you not tip? Like I always lose an extra dollar at Phil's because of that. I'm not gonna lie. So I don't know if it's like dark or unpleasant because they're probably like not paid enough, but yeah, that's kind of the idea behind it. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, also, I guess this kind of ties into like this concept that I learned in a data ethics course. There's this term called like choice architecture, which refers to like this concept of designing things intentionally to like also alter a behavior's choices, and we like call them nudges. But yeah, this is like good to keep in mind. Okay. Let's see. Oh, a couple more terms. We have forced continuity. This is like a really elaborate way of just saying like when you have a free trial for something, like later, as a user, you might like forget about it and you end up paying a bunch. So that's like probably not made super clear to the user, but again, benefits the company's bottom line. And then also like bait and switch, another term. These are all terms we probably won't see for the rest of this course and might seem irrelevant to you guys, at least as students in this course. But this is really good to think of as designers. But yeah, so bait and switch is also that idea. Again, kind of founded in like deception. It's not really like, it's kind of looked down upon, but is nonetheless a very common practice. But yeah, that's basically false advertising. That's all there is to that. Okay, that's a bad word. Let's see. So I don't really have much to say about this one. It's just like pop-up ads. Pop-up ads are gross. There's this. I don't know how common this is, but like, our little like wrap here is advertised as like being this long, but it's actually not. And I've actually never seen that. I don't think this is a real thing, but I don't know. You guys take this how you will. Yeah. Oh, this one's really good. So I don't know if you guys have ever like unintentionally signed up for mailing lists, but the unsubscribe button, I guess all emails are kind of light mode. I don't know if you can have your email in like dark mode to display this way, but like the font is white. So like the unsubscribe button is like painfully hard to find. So tying us back to that concept of forced continuity, or like they're trying really hard to force continuity while like abiding by the law. But yeah, really shady practices. There's also this one, again, forced continuity. What is this? Like it's free for 3 days. But unless you set a reminder for yourself, like, are you really going to cancel it? You're going to end up paying like, was that $50? $50 a week? I didn't even see that. But yeah, like, I remember at least for me, I like signed up for Spotify Premium without a family plan. And I was coasting on the free trial for like months. And then the bill came in and I was like, yo, what? So I've definitely been like duped. This is one that actually I just added today because I got dinner here. I don't know. Oh, if you guys are Snack Pass users, which I'm sure most of you guys are, like check for this fee, this bag thing. I only like realized maybe like several months into using Snack Pass, but a lot of restaurants, a lot of places have it like automatically set to 1, and you don't need a bag for like a cup of boba, right? You don't need a bag, so please subtract it. Yeah, save yourself that 10 or 15 cents. Escape the system. Yeah. Okay. So I kind of already touched on this, but the simple reason why the brands employ these kind of dark practices or UX tactics is they're trying to get you guys to behave in certain ways, make certain choices that ultimately earn them more profit. There's like almost no other reason. The other reason, sorry, is to gather more data or bump up their email list. I didn't think about that. But yeah, most of the time it's the profit line. Okay. So we'll kind of look at more, so we've seen kind of inconveniences or like really trivial examples, but we'll get into more, I guess, scaled up examples that kind of touch on ethical concerns. Not so much this one, I guess Instacart. I don't know, I'm not really an Instacart user, but I think they have like their default tip set to like 5% or something. So if you don't notice, you might end up tipping. I think other systems also have their default tip set. Sometimes it's like 15 to 20%. So again, watch out for that. I'd say like Some of these are like inconvenient, but again, there's like more like bigger, more significant moral implications behind dark design. Here's one that's like not super obviously clear why it's like in this slide, but I'll kind of get started talking about this. I think we've concerned ourselves with like expanding the scope of our knowledge of like what we can do as designers, like how can we program this feature, like how can we add this or that, but we haven't really touched on like, should we do things, like what should we do, what is the scope of like what we should even consider to implement. I don't know if you guys have watched, I'm sure most of you guys have watched like Jurassic Park, kind of the big theme, right? It's like we're so concerned with what we can do, or I don't know, basically that. Yeah. So the idea is like we look at features like this, and maybe we'll think like, oh, wow, that's so cool. You can put like, you can be Bob Marley, right? Or whatever. How did they implement this, right? So that's maybe like your initial reaction, right? But it's not super obviously, or it is kind of obviously not politically correct. And this should get us thinking about like what designers are behind the curtains of these like products and features, right? What are their beliefs? Like what are their ideologies and values? Yeah, so this is like really tied to this idea of the responsibility attached to the role of designers. Yeah, and so next example, this one's also pretty bad. Basically, if you can't tell what's happening here, this is, I think, like a Google, yeah, one of Google's like machine learning algorithms that's supposed to like identify like the object in a picture, right? Or like whatever is like in the picture. And even though this is like not intentional, like we know that this is like blatantly wrong, right? So even though we've talked about having like good intentions, right? We don't want to like make users, or ethically or morally speaking, we don't want to make users pay for things that they didn't know they were paying for. But also, I don't think the designers behind this algorithm necessarily like intended for this. Regardless of intent, though, the result is the same. So we have to like consider not just like the intent behind our work, but also just like the scope. So I think this is probably due to lack of training data, I'm assuming. And as such, like the algorithm doesn't operate as intended. But maybe that's like an oversight of the designers, as they didn't like consider like, oh, where are we like lacking certain data to like make this perform optimally. Yeah, this one's also, I don't know if you guys have heard of this. I don't know when this happened. I'm sure this like links to the article. I won't click on it now, but essentially the TLDR of this one is Facebook like selected two groups of users, like huge groups of users, didn't tell them, performed kind of this like A/B test on them to manipulate very subtly like the mood of certain posts that appeared on like one group's pages, and then same with the other, but they altered it such that one group was given more like positive posts, whereas the other one was given more negative. And you can kind of see where this is going, right? At the end of the experiment, I don't know how long it went on, but they like measured, I don't know if it was like self-reported or I don't know what metrics they used, but they essentially determined that like by like a very statistically significant margin, users who were exposed to like the positive posts were like experiencing more positive emotions and vice versa. And so you can see how like, and they had not like consented to this at all, or maybe they had in like terms and conditions tucked away in like the hundreds of pages that we kind of just like ignore. But you can kind of see like Facebook is like incredibly powerful. I think litigation, or in the context of like litigation, they're like untouchable monoliths, right? Or they are an untouchable monolith, along with like other huge tech companies. And you can also like think of them as like a huge designer. Like they are in a sense like social designers. So I guess the question we want to like start thinking of is like how do we like hold them accountable? Obviously, I'm sure you guys would agree that this is not actually. Let's find out. Raise your hand if you think this was like an ethical experiment. No hands. Cool. I agree. But like we can't really do anything about that, right? So not to like be a downer, but that's the unfortunate situation. These designers have so much responsibility and they have so much at stake, and yet they can pretty much do whatever they want. So I guess bringing it back, what does this mean for designers or us? You guys are all designers now. Essentially, you have a responsibility towards both the brand and the user. I know you guys have probably just been thinking of the brand as like your gypsies midterm or whatever, but if you continue to pursue this outside of this decal and you do want to like design things, you do want to maybe pursue UX as a career, or sorry, UI UX as a career, this is something that you should keep in mind. It is definitely your job to create like great products, things that are fun to look at, and things that are fun to use. But I think more importantly is you have to make those experiences like honest and transparent. I think this idea of choice architecture and like all the other things we've discussed are very much like falling under this gray area of deception. Maybe it's like not blatant lies, but nudges towards behavior that the user is not aware of. Yes, okay. Oh, I guess I'll open this up for questions. I guess we've seen a lot of examples in like, I guess, digitally, but are there any other like dark patterns in your own daily interactions that you've noticed? Yes.
With making it like stupid hard so that like do not sell my information, but making it stupid hard to like,
yeah, absolutely. That's definitely a type of choice architecture. Because even though you have a choice, they're giving you a choice. Do you want to sell the data or not? Right. One of the choices is so like damn hard to like go through with that you end up deciding to go with the thing that they want you to choose. Right. So definitely a great example of choice architecture. And yeah. Anyone else have any other examples? There's like plenty of examples, like also in like physical structures as well. So I guess one more I can give to get you guys like started. There's one like supermarkets. Supermarkets place all the essentials like milk and eggs, bread, stuff like that in the back, so that to get there you have to like traverse all that, like at least one whole aisle, and you'll most likely be like tempted by like something to buy more, right? Impulse buy at the cashier. I went to Safeway today. That's why I have all like this example. Impulse buy, right? Like, yeah. I thought I would just get milk. Sorry, this is like a tangent. Never mind. Let's just keep going. Does anyone have any other examples? Yeah. Ooh, that's yeah, for sure. I think a more like boring traditional stock trading platform would be like probably the more honest option, but would it entice users to buy more or like trade more? Probably not, right? So I think that's also a good example. I lost all my money in Dogecoin. Does anyone have? We'll do one more. We'll do one more. Just one more. Literally, like all you guys have been correct. I know you guys have seen this in your life. Or I can just like point. Kelly, I don't want to like burden this. Yeah, what's up? Sure.
You know what? I don't know if it's like it's pretty new, but if you download an app, I'm seeing it also just and then it's like, oh, if you don't, you can't access it.
Yeah, exactly. It's like if I'm downloading the most like trendy social media app and I have to like click a button that says I'm okay with giving up all my personal data, the truth is like I'm probably gonna do it, right? I don't know how much of choice architecture that is. That's kind of like getting into social engineering. That's not really part of this course, but hopefully you guys can see how there are like much grander moral implications behind design as a whole, and it's not just like creating cool things. But yeah, that's, oh, I guess there's a little more, huh? Ooh, there is. Yeah, phones are addicting. We're all screenagers. Okay, let's just move on. This last thing, I'll just open it really quick. I won't go through it, but this is probably the most important thing you guys should take away from this lecture. And it's essentially, this says it right here. It's essentially a code of ethics for designers. There's no way to like formalize or like strictly define rules for every single situation that can be applied universally. There's no like algorithm for like what's ethical. Hence why like philosophy exists, or at least the ethics portion of it. But I think this, like, I don't know if it's a blog post or something, but it goes through pretty much all the important principles that you should be considering when you design anything. We talked about human-centered design, more so in the context of like, oh, what would a user want? But it's also considering like they are a human and like you should treat them as you would a person, like face to face. There's also a lot of things that we can go into, but I won't. So please, if you have the time, which you guys probably don't, but if you are interested at all, I think you should. This is definitely a good read. yeah, and so that's pretty much like the ethics portion of design. Hopefully that wasn't like too dark. I don't really have, or maybe I should try to like spin this in a positive light. Something like you guys have the power to like make a difference. But just keep this in mind, honestly. Yeah. So questions. You guys have any questions? What's up?
Just like for the rest of the semester, how many labs and homeworks do you have?
Oh, how many labs? I have to count. I don't have it off the top of my head. Do you guys know?
3 or 4.
Three or four? Sure. Yeah. Oh, both. 3 or 4, both. Yeah. And then you guys also have your final project. I don't know if you guys are like super familiar with like the grading scheme, but it's like 100 points total in this class. Oh, you guys will be sent out, if not already, your grade reports by your whatever TA is, whoever your TA is. So please look at that. The way the grading is like set up is that out of the 100 points, the final project is like 32. So, and you need a 70 or above to like pass. So you can kind of see if you don't submit your final project, you don't pass. So keep that in mind. But hopefully after today, you'll get a good sense of like where you are in this class. And again, if you have any questions, just like email your TA. But yeah, any other questions relating to the material or not the material? Is there anything past this? Ooh. If not, I will move on to attendance and stop the recording.